I prefer actually emails. The reason when emails, when you start dealing with legal questions, it's nice to have it in writing. You pose a question, I'll respond. If I don't know the answer, I'll get it for you through the LCI Legal. They're very helpful. Interesting enough, is one of their attorneys is actually from Kingman, Arizona, and so I met her. I think at Columbus, Ohio, I met her, and she was very accommodating, like most of the other staff at LCI. Let me do some introductions. I'd like to introduce my wife, Ada Calderon. She's from Costa Rica, and she's my mainstay. She's been, as CC Jim will tell you, PCC Jim will tell you, she goes to everything I go to, so it's very supportive. I've been practicing law since 1984. I'm licensed in Arizona, Nevada, and California. I only actively practice in Arizona because I'm plenty busy in one state. We don't need to be extending beyond that. I've advised a multitude of nonprofits, either as legal counsel or serving on their boards, including local food bank, hospital, women's shelter, cancer society, pregnancy counseling, regional and local elks, statewide poverty law firm, and a church. What we're going to be going over, a lot of this does apply to nonprofits as a whole. Most of it is actually from Lions themselves. This is actually a presentation not developed by me. It was actually developed by Pastor International Director Steve Glass. He presented it at the USA-Canada Forum in Columbus, Ohio. So I just want to give credit where credit's due. It's a very fine PowerPoint, so there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If you can't see, I just encourage you to move forward or move into a position where you can see, and encourage you. Also, as you have questions, jot them down. I wish we could say we'd stick around afterwards and discuss it, but we have another section of seminars after this. So as a result, that's why maybe at happy hour, while we both have a glass of wine, we can talk about it. Of course, legal advice with alcohol involved is not real good legal advice. So I will just point that out to you. So I'll give a disclaimer up front. This is our outline of what we're going to cover, and we're going to look at managing and minimizing risk and insurance issues. Interestingly enough, last week there was an incident with a Lions activity. I was contacted, and a person is making a claim against our insurance policy. It can happen so easily. Unfortunately, we're in a society that attorneys advertise. They advertise 24/7. I can't tell. You know, you turn on that TV and there's some guy advertising about Roundup. Yeah, Roundup, or what do they call those patches they put on the? Well, I can't think of all the medical terms, but they got everything else. Yeah, what that mesh? Yeah, that mesh. And man, everybody thinks that, you know, I'm hurt, I should be able to sue, which that's so silly, and we'll talk more about that. But we're going to talk about that. Sometimes as Lions, we take things for granted and we drop our guard, and as a result, we do put our organization at risk. And so this is something you got to be concerned about. And not that you're not going to stop doing what you do, but you just need to take the necessary safeguards. The next thing we're going to do is talking about trademarks. Trademarks are very important. There are the big corporations, they protect their trademark with a vengeance. They'll take you to federal district court at a drop of a hat. And Lions, likewise, we should protect our trademarks. We don't want someone else representing them to be from our organization and cause us harm. That is very critical, that we make sure our trademarks are properly protected, and believe it or not, each of you as a Lion has an obligation to look out for that and report any violation that you suspect, because the legal department at LCI will investigate it, and if need be, litigation will be instituted if they won't back off on using it wrongfully. The other thing is use of funds of financial transparency. The key to a nonprofit is when a total stranger walks in and asks for financial records, we have certain obligations as a nonprofit to disclose those. I represent For example, Route 66 of Arizona, and we have an individual who's made an inquiry about the financial aspects of that organization. Because you have a 990, which most of us are using very brief 990s, and what would show actually would be very minimal, but under the Internal Revenue Code, you are obligated to provide a copy. Now you can charge for the copy, but we'll get into that a little bit here.
What's a 990?
990 is what 501c3s have to file on an annual basis. Okay? All right. Now, this is definitely too small to read, but there's a handout. PCC Ron has a copy for you.
Anybody need one?
A copy of this PowerPoint. Rand, I'm talking to you.
Ron.
There's a copy right there.
Yeah, here,
Yeah.
Rand's talking. He's behind me.
Yeah, he's Rand was looking at me so strange. He's like, Rand, you know.
Too many R's.
I do store my words, especially after a bottle of wine. No. Anyway, so this is very important, and there's actually a checklist that's available, fantastic checklist on LCI. These resources are in your, like the second to the last page of this handout. This is why I'm presenting this handout to you, because you do need to look at some of these things that are being referenced in these slides, because it goes through very things you take for granted. For example, what's the condition of the parking area where you're having your activity? Is it properly lit at night if you're doing a night activity? Is there proper safeguards in place to avoid people tripping and falling over hazards? Is there, in fact, enough security to make sure no one's going to get injured or robbed at gunpoint and stuff like that? I mean, those sound like drastic things, but when we have activities, you are in a position where, in theory, someone can get hurt either accidentally or intentionally, and our role as Lions is to minimize that risk. And that's really the important thing about risk, is that it's important from the standpoint of physical presence, but then there's also these other types of risks. For example, risk to your volunteers. A few years back, Lionada's back of truck, we're decorating for the Christmas parade. A young man steps on a board, flips her out of the truck, and she lands on the ground, and she's conked. She actually passes out. Fortunately, nothing was permanently injured on her. She was only wearing 4 jackets and 3 pairs of pants. She was well cushioned, but it could have been much more drastic. And that's a situation where, probably in retrospect, there should have been a little bit more care given as to how the volunteers were operating. Sometimes we get so excited about being volunteers, we do things carelessly and put others at risk or put ourselves at risk. And there's such thing as a safety officer. And I don't know if you realize that, but a safety officer is actually a member of the Lions Club. Very few of us have safety officers in our clubs, but it is, if you look at the list of officers, that is in fact one of your people. In the other organizations, a safety officer's role is to check on insurance, check on activities to make sure there's nothing being put at risk. And that can include financial risk. For example, when you are collecting money, how are you securing that money? Are you letting a cash box with several $1,000s just sit out there where someone can just grab it and run it? Are you putting someone at risk that they're walking from the event to their car and someone pulls out a gun and says, "We want the cash"? I've been involved with beer gardens with the Elks Watch, and I will have walked someone with as much as $6 grand in my pocket. And you talk about you got to be very careful. Usually I have 3 or 4 people with me. We don't make a big deal about it, but we very casually walk to the vehicles and we're together, but you have to be extremely cautious. There are people out there that if they knew you had that much cash, they pull a gun on you. There's just no question in my mind. So those are things that you need to be thinking about. And again, when you talk to lawyers, we're the most pessimistic individuals you ever talk to, because we think of the worst scenarios. And it's not because we're really pessimistic, it's just that we have dealt with so many situations that are a little bit out of the ordinary. Because you don't go to a lawyer because you don't have a problem, you go to a lawyer because there are problems. And so as a result, You know, I can tell you all sorts of stuff that would scare you half to death, and chances are it'll never happen to you, but it's much better to be preventive than to have to deal with it after the fact when someone has been injured or hurt as a result of carelessness. Got another new customer, Ron? Yeah, new customer. Get that new customer. Okay. The one important point from this slide is determine what your goal is in your activity. PCC Rand just gave a presentation about health fairs. There's a goal there, but there's also a risk there. Dr. Bidner, who is a Lion, got sued because of a certain activity. So as a result, there's a disclaimer in place. We as Lions, sometimes with fundraisers or sometimes with our service activities, we have a goal. There's a risk connected with anything you do in life. We all took a big risk to drive here. We're more apt to be killed in our trip from here home than if we flew across the world. I mean, it is, so we all took a calculated risk of what we do. And as clubs, we should think of it the same way. There's a calculated risk of what we do. And once you recognize the risk, how are you going to minimize it? Do you buy more insurance? Do you add additional lights to your facility? Do you hire a security group that maybe will volunteer some of their time? I mean, that's the whole purpose of this discussion, is not to stop you from doing it, but recognize the risk and then try to minimize it by whatever you choose to do. Safety planning. Like I said, you need to be looking at your parking situation. You need to be looking at crowd control if that's an issue. One beauty of being in a small community like Lion Rand and I are, we don't have crowd issues usually. It's just we don't have enough people to create a crowd. But you know, some of you are in more metropolitan areas, and therefore you need to be looking at, you know, do you have a crowd issue? Those who attended the Las Vegas convention, I don't know how many of you were at the parade at the end. I will tell you it was a disaster because they had not properly put in enough security, enough guidance to keep people from rushing the buses. Lion Otta got so upset, she actually had a little bit of a sunstroke. We got her in the shade, and then we went to one of the nearby casinos and had a nice lunch and took Uber home. It was impossible to get on the buses. It was just literally an impossibility. And I'm not trying to be politically incorrect, but there are certain cultures that just have a little different way of doing things, and we Americans are a bunch of wusses compared to them when it comes to getting on a bus. So that's the best way I can put it. So anyway.
Bob, you got a hand?
Yes, Chris.
When you're planning parking, you also have to, in Illinois, it was like 10% for handicap. You have to have so many handicap spots in a parking lot.
Check with your local, that's usually a zoning requirement with your city council or your county if it's not within a city limits. There has to be ADA, American Disabilities Act, accessibility to the disabled. And someone was mentioning yesterday that we as Lions have more disabilities than anyone else, which I guess if we're sensitive about others' disabilities and we can make accommodations, we're supposed to, under federal law and state law, make what's called reasonable accommodations. And that can be anywhere from helping somebody in a wheelchair up a ramp. That can be anywhere, making sure there's a ramp in place, making sure the disability access is well marked. I have an office that's located on the hillside, and we are able to bring those in wheelchairs through a ramp through our library. We have a series of stairs in the front because when you're on a hill, your building is not level. You just have, and so as a result, we've had to make accommodations. At your activities, you got to do the same thing: is look around. Is this going to be accessible to somebody with a wheelchair? Are they going to have adequate parking, like PDG Chris says? Is there going to be, sufficient ability for somebody who is visually impaired? Are they going to be able to maneuver around safely at the event? I mean, we are there to serve the blind. So you'd think that's a no-brainer, folks, that we would be looking for that. But sometimes, because we're sighted, we overlook it. And that we just got to be a little bit more sensitive. In regards to, some of us use these tents, these activity tents. Well, guess what? With activity tents, you've got big old stakes, and you've got lines coming across, and you talk about a trip hazard. We happen to have an incident at lunchtime with a trip hazard. And that's not supposed to happen. You know, those lines should be, you know, those extension cords should have been taped down, marked well, and yesterday at the council meeting, we also had a trip hazard too. I mean, it was just, folks, we've got to be a little bit more careful here. There's no point in one of us breaking our legs or arms because we're falling down. And of course, like Chris, hopefully you don't have a broken arm. But he was well agile, and he just rolled right into the fall. But that doesn't always happen. So we just need to be, with the tent stakes, you know, those should be with orange flashing, you know, survey tape, should be well marked, because again, you don't want anybody to be injured at your event. All right, general liability insurance program. We're going to play a little trivia pursuit. Do you need to, let me put it this way. When you are trying to provide proof of insurance, has anybody done that before? Okay. How'd you do it?
I went online and got the LCI insurance policy and presented that to the city, and that made them happy.
That is the way you do it. You go online, and now you need to look what that policy provides coverage. We're going to get into more details. It's not a cover-all, end-all sort of coverage, but you know, when you need to provide proof of insurance for most of your activities, you can go online and get that liability. In the old days, you used to have to call legal. Legal would then ask some questions, and then you would get it in the mail a couple weeks later. Those old days are gone. That's why there's old days. But yeah, so it is a fairly simple process. Sometimes activities will require naming additional insureds. So you need to look at that aspect of it. Additional insured, for those who don't understand that terminology, is if in fact there's an incident that the additional insured is sued, that insurance policy covers them also. Cities frequently will want you identifying them as additional insured if you do something at a location where the city owns the facility.
And the minimum requirement of insurance that they ask for.
Right. Yeah, so you gotta get all those details. And in this handout, it talks about how you can increase the insurance coverage. So that's at the tail end of this handout. And so you don't, you know, there's $1 million coverage, but believe it or not, sometimes $1 million is not sufficient, depending on what you're involved in. The claims that arise out for the operation, use, or maintenance of aircraft, automobiles owned by Lions clubs, organizations, and certain watercraft are not covered. I know that might seem fairly inconsequential, but that's very important, especially if you're, for example, taking people from one spot to another in a Lions car. That's not a covered activity, so just be careful about that. The policy is automatic coverage. It's put out by ACE, American Insurance, and it does provide coverage to the clubs and districts as long as it's limited to what's the bigger coverage they identify. All right. How do you like this for a legal disclaimer? Nothing in this seminar can be construed to extend, alter, vary, or waive any of the provisions of the policy. Well, I'm sure some lawyer wrote that. But anyway, the important thing is to get that policy, review it carefully. If you do not understand the policy, try to find somebody who does, because honestly, some of these insurance policies are very difficult to read and interpret. They've been written by lawyers, and they usually have been modified because of litigation over the years, and so as a result, some of that verbiage is not something we do every day in the use of our normal conversations. Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned proof of insurance. There are two types of proof of insurance that you can request. And one of them is for governmental agencies and for the purpose of getting a permit. How does that differ from your from the other additional insured coverage that you can get?
Well, I mean, what it would amount to would be, for example, in order to get a permit from the city to have an event, they want proof of insurance so there's not some issue. But say Kiwanis wanted to join you in your activities. Kiwanis probably has a similar policy, but they might request they be identified as additional insured. That's the best example I can give to you right off the top of my head. So, okay. The one thing that's a real misunderstanding with insurance is a liability policy. What a liability policy is, there has to be a showing of negligence before there's coverage. In other words, just because someone got hurt, they could have got hurt because of their own stupidity, and that happens. You know, you think of situations where you yourself tripped over your own feet. Well, chances are it was because you tripped over your own feet, not because someone else had any sort of negligence. So it is a liability policy, and that's where adjusters come in, they investigate, they determine what if there is negligence. Sometimes it's not 100% negligence. We have what's called comparative fault in the state of Arizona. And it could be, I'm over at Chris's home and I trip over his stairs and I'm wearing loose-fitting shoes that contribute to my fall 20%, and he's found 80%. And not that we're going to have that happen, but that's just a bad example. Anyway, the whole idea with comparative negligence is you have to find something at fault before the insurance has to pay. Just because you get hurt, the insurance doesn't cut a check automatically. Okay? And there's an exclusion for athletics for our policy. There's other types of insurance. There's an insurance called D&O, stands for Directors, Officers Insurance. The best example of that is your board of directors somehow makes a mistake and does something that someone's injured as a result. Well, I'm trying to think of a good example. It's cover your directors and officers as long as they're doing within the scope of their job as a director and officer. That's the best way to describe it.
If the trigger runs off of the money, you got covered.
Yeah, and that's where you get into the crime fidelity, the bonding aspect of your trigger. Yes, Patrick.
Is it true that, let's say that there's any kind of liability, really, any liability claim that they would say, okay, someone got hurt, the board of directors or the officers should have had procedures that covered that, and we don't have the procedure. So they're going to sue both almost every time, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, what will happen is attorneys do what's called a shotgun approach. The shotgun approach, you shoot a shotgun, and whoever gets hit with the pellets, you get sued, whether you're liable or not. So you're correct from the standpoint that when you're an officer or director, you could be named in a lawsuit. With the insurance we have in place as Lions, as a general rule, if you in fact have, if you were not acting in your own malintent or in a gross negligent manner, then that insurance would cover even a lawsuit of that nature. Those of us who are incorporated, you have a provision for indemnity. Indemnity is where if you do get sued, your club says they will provide the protection of an attorney to defend you. Now, many of our clubs could never even hire an attorney because we don't have that much in our administrative funds. I mean, we'd be broke at that point. But that's the purpose of this insurance, is hopefully to cover that sort of situation. But you are correct. When it gets nasty, they're going to sue everybody they can think of, and then the attorneys have the fun of sorting it all out because they figure the more they sue, the more money they can get. That's It's
So that's
unfortunate.
covered by our land insurance?
Yeah, as long as, I mean, it covers it as long as it was not gross negligence. Gross negligence, an example is where, well, the only thing I really write off is, say I'm security, well, no, that's not a good example. Say I have a gun and I'm at a function and I'm stupid enough to have the gun and I'm showing the gun around and it discharges and kills somebody. That would be so grossly negligent that even though it wasn't pointed at somebody, but it's so irresponsible in handling a gun. Anyone who owns guns, we recognize that they don't do stupid stuff like that. But that'd be an example. Yes.
Would an example be, say you have a flag program, you found this flag 6 times a year, and you have a little trailer that you put the flags on while you're out putting them up, and say a flag falls off the trailer, and maybe a kid comes by on a bicycle, flips on that flag, and gets hurt really bad, would you be covered under this, or would that be considered gross negligence because you didn't have the flags anchored to the trailer?
See, that's so factually specific. You'd have to, there'd be an investigation done, and as a person who loaded the flags hadn't taken the safeguards to tie the flags down, and somehow it slipped loose, it's hard to say. You really can't, I can't answer the question that simply, but that would definitely become something that would be investigated. And again, the purpose of this seminar is not to stop you doing it from the flag programs, but make sure those flags are properly tied down. I mean, that's really the lesson to be learned here. So, good question though. Okay.
Is D&O insurance specifically covered under the, what I said, the general liability insurance is provided as well? Or is this something that you have to purchase in addition?
My understanding, you have to purchase it in addition. This is the way, these are additional, what's showing here are insurance beyond the standard policy. So, okay.
So do you know it's not included?
That's my understanding.
It is not included.
What I can do is, Patrick, you're pretty sure it's not?
Yes.
Okay. If it's my suggestion is look at that standard policy, but I don't believe it is. I think Patrick's 100% correct. Okay. For those who don't know, Patrick, are you president this year again, or 2 years in a row?
Yeah. Now, one thing is that if you have a homeowner's policy, like under my umbrella, if they sue me as a director or officer in an organization that I don't get paid for, up to $250,000, over that they cover it, my umbrella. So I make sure I have umbrella because I'm in other organizations that are more dangerous to be involved in than the Lions.
Okay. Okay, this gets into more details about the supplemental insurance. The one interesting additional liability insurance. This coverage offers limits of insurance in addition to the $1 million of coverage that LCI automatically provides. So that's something to keep in mind. The standard policy is $1 million, and unfortunately, those who've been involved in litigation, $1 million sounds like a lot to each of us, but lawyers, they talk about it like it's chump change. So they sue frequently for much larger numbers than just $1 million. There is your standard policy does not have a liquor liability coverage. If you serve alcohol at an event, be extremely cautious. Like I said, I've ran beer gardens at the Elks Lodge. Elks, they seem to drink more than lions, which is probably a good thing for lions. We don't drink so much. But anyway, we actually had the Grand Lodge had a $6 million liquor liability coverage. But if you get into serving alcohol, you really need to have individuals trained to recognize when enough is enough, when you have to stop serving. There's a whole different arena when you start dealing with booze. I would not recommend it unless you really are willing to go to the effort to be well prepared in serving it. You also need some big boys like CC Jim where some guy gets smart and says, I want another one, you say, no, you're cut off, and they want to throw a punch, and you just say kindly, sir, you're going to have to leave or I'm going to have to call security. So it happens. Accident insurance, this coverage is when one of your members has an accident on, that is a situation where there is not negligence, but like the situation with Line Auto where she was injured in the process of getting the float together. If our club had an accident insurance, in theory there would have been coverage to cover the medical bills that was incurred as a result of her having a concussion. All right, let's get into trademarks. And the important thing with trademarks is LCI has now made it much easier. We used to have to get a license each year. And I think when Rain can remember when we were, every year we had, if we didn't get that license, then we were restricted on whether we could have shirts made up for the club members and things like that. Now they've made it much, much easier. And the one thing I want to point out in this slide, nationally, this is like a no-brainer. It says that the trademark shall not be used in any way that may be offensive in the relevant Lions community, which seems like you wouldn't have to put that in writing, but that's, so, we want, when we all became members, part of our initiation was you are now the public representative to our organization. What we do, whether it's as a member at our club meeting, or whether we do it at church, or whether we do it in our profession, we are representing Lions, and that's something sometimes we forget, but we are a Lions 24/7. You can't just because you're not wearing the vest doesn't mean you're not a Lion, because people know you're a Lion, and it badly reflects if you're doing bad acts. Sort of thing. All right, like I said, if you see any violation, and it may be not a violation, but if you suspect it's a violation, call LCI Legal, and they'll want to investigate. And if there's a problem, they'll put a stop to it. And if it's not, then don't need to worry about it. You're automatically able to use trademarks for your websites, social media, digital media, brochures, signage, flyers, newspaper ads. That you don't need any special permission from. You're automatically authorized to use the trademarks on letterheads and business cards, if such clearly identifies the member, club, and personal contact information. The Lions are automatically authorized to use the Lions trademark on a number of sponsored programs such as Leo, Lioness Clubs, official contests, youth camps, and other official association programs. That's just automatic. Use of Lions trademarks on clothing. Now this is kind of interesting. 30 is a magic number. If your club is 30 or less, you can use the Lions trademark on 30 items of clothing, excluding vests. Vests are excluded throughout this whole process, which I don't know why, but that's what it is. And if you want to go beyond that 30 number, then you do need to get a special input from LCI, get permission.
That's on any shirts?
Yeah, how big's your club?
We're like 25.
Okay, because you're over 30, then you can exceed that number by the number of members of your club. So say your club doesn't apply. Who has over 30 in the here? Okay, say you have, how many do you have in Levine? 35. So in theory, you're not limited by 30, you're limited by 35, the number of members you have in your club.
Oh, okay.
So if I put this on a running shirt and order 100, I've got to get a special permit?
That's my understanding, yes. How big's your club?
17.
Oh, yeah, so you get the first 17 without problems, but once you go beyond,
One of our fundraisers is a run, a 10K run, and I'll order up 100 shirts.
Oh, well, if it's part of a sponsorship, that's different. In other words, you're saying like Kiwanis, Lions, Elks are all in this running shirt?
No, just us.
Just you, okay.
Just us.
Yeah, so check with LCI Legal on that, but my understanding is, if it was just the Lions shirt itself, you'd be limited to 30, not 17, but 30 but if you go over 30, then you got to get special permission. As far as I know, it's not a hassle getting special permission, but you just need to comply with the rules. All right. Some of this you can read for yourself. As you tell, I'm not reading slides to you, so you got homework for yourself. I've never seen much reason to read slides to you. Okay, I want to go into use of funds, financial transparency. I was at a club meeting that ran. Help me on time, if you would, just make sure I don't go past. I was at a club meeting a year or so ago, and the treasurer stands up and says, "This is the last financial report I'm reading to the general club. From this point on, you have to be a member of the board of directors to hear about our financials." Well, that's an example of a total violation of all sorts of things. And within a few weeks, that individual actually transferred to a different club. But that's right. You need to recognize that you have two different accounts. What are the names of the accounts? And they're called different things. Like admin, activities. The charity money is foundation, is another way to, if you have foundation. The monies that you're out there generating as with public funding, it goes back to the public. That's the easiest way to look at it. Now, in expenditures related to doing that public funding, we do a golf ball drop, for example. The golf ball drop, it's not free. We got to print tickets. And we have to rent the field. So those are expenditures that come out of our charity account, but the rest of that money better not go into the pockets of the members. It goes back to the public through charity activities.
We're just talking gross over net, that's all.
Yeah, that's a good accounting term. So the net of your activity, as long as it's directly related, that's the key. Expenditure has to be directly related to that particular charity event. All right. Now, how do we raise monies through our administrative accounts? Dues, yeah.
Fines, auctions, and meetings.
Yeah, it's money from the individual members, and that's pays for example, the luncheons for your speakers. That if you pay for a registration to come here for a club member, that comes out of that administrative account. So that's why we have two different accounts. Don't want to ever forget that.
You know, you cross.
What?
Say you have a yard sale, and your members buy some of the yard sale items. They're not the general public, so you can put that over in your administrative.
Well, we're going to come to that in just a second because, yes, PCC Rand.
Well, we want to make the point, you can always take activity funds and put it into, or administrative funds and put it in the activity fund, but you can't go in the reverse.
What's your question?
I don't see anything about bereavements in there at all.
Bereavements? You mean for members? Or for?
Members and spouses, we have bereavements. I want to make sure it's in the right account.
Help me here, somebody.
I have to be administration because it's all internally.
Okay, if it's internal benefit to the members, that's one way to view it.
Okay.
Did you hear the question?
No.
Their club has bereavements for lost members and the spouses. And the question is, what account should that be coming out of? And her conclusion is through the administrative account. Okay, just I want to make sure everybody heard the question.
Well, then at the same time, if the club receives something in honor of a deceased member, that can go into the administration account.
Right.
I think we're starting to get a little.
Comes from somebody on the outside. It's not a
Public has to go back to the public.
Yeah, well, I've I don't think you could put it into the administrative account when it's a gift like that, like an inheritance or a gift that's.
Well, bereavements, it says bequest, but that's a different thing, so.
Yeah, bequests are things that come from wills or trust where someone has provided to the club the result of somebody passing away.
Well, what about if you sell, say, I know several clubs sell placemat ads, and then the placemats are used in their community.
No, it'd be a charity account, because way to look at it is people are doing that to contribute to your organization.
Yeah, really.
Because they don't really need a placemat ad, most of these people. And that's probably the easiest way to explain it that way. Great fundraiser though, but.
It is a great
That's been a
fundraiser,
vote of
but it goes
intention
in
in the club, so that's why I want to clarify.
Well, and-
Really, they all think, well, we're not really getting anything, because we're letting somebody else use the mats, but.
What my suggestion for any of these legal issues, you put it in writing to LCI Legal, and LCI Legal will put it in writing back to you. Don't get into club disputes on this, because that'll ruin your membership. I mean, it can be a cancer. 245, thanks, Jim. Yep, go ahead.
I was gonna say, to me, if you have it down, you put it in the charity account.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong.
Yeah, it can't go wrong. And that, the rest of the handout, I would recommend you look at. I do have some extra copies if you want to take some for other clubs. You know, this is important information because, as you can tell, if you what's the saying is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Yeah, thank you for the saying. All right, thank you all for being here. You're welcome. You have one more comment? Oh,
Yes, absolutely.
Lawyers called me, and they just said, you see something that says, down there, we had to change the name, even though I didn't say as long as it's kind of like parallel cars. Thank you. We call it.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you.
We did motorcycles.
They kind of laid off me.
Right across the road. We got to put it all
They're out there. They're not.
Yeah, we had actually that.
We
you know, with that, whichever council.
I was last year.
As long as it's not taken from the public, it's an individual member. And so, if like all your homes have flags, but you also put flags out in commercial settings.
Cut back.
18 to 12. So you're making flags in other.
That's the only reason. If I'd have been there, I would have been there.
If you want your own personal flag, where the issue would come up is, I'm charging Chris, he's part of the club, I get $100 a year from him. That $100 I get from him, he's going to charity. Yeah. You still want a $20 ticket, so I got it. Yes, I do. No, but if it's only your own personal flag, say, hey, I'm going to have a flag at my place in club, I'm buying my own flag. That's not an issue. It's just like Rand said, if you edge on the, well, you said, if you edge on the having a charity habit, that works out best. Yeah, we're going to go different places. I gotta find
That's mainly what that's, yeah.
Well, the president one is ready.
that was trademarked as run.